Hello there, and welcome to the Daily Dose of Lore. Tonight, we're drifting into ancient Greece, where marble temples hold whispers of immortal voices and every shadow conceals a god. Let this be your moment to settle. The world outside can wait. From Zeus hurling thunder from his throne, to Aphrodite weaving love into mortal hearts, to Hades ruling silently beneath the earth. We're exploring every deity who shaped this ancient world. Some stories may surprise you. Others will simply drift by like incense smoke. If this helps you unwind, a like and subscribe help others find their way here too. Now, let's understand every god in Greek mythology. In the beginning was chaos, though not the disorder we imagine today. The ancient Greeks spoke of a yawning void, a vast emptiness that stretched beyond comprehension. Neither light nor dark, but something before both. It was potential itself, the canvas upon which all existence would be painted. From this infinite nothingness, the first stirrings of being emerged, not created but simply becoming, as if the universe took its first breath after an eternity of holding still. Chaos was the silence before the song, the pause before creation's first word. Mortals who contemplated it felt vertigo, as though standing at the edge of existence itself, peering into the absence that preceded everything. Even the gods who came after rarely spoke of chaos directly, for to name it was to acknowledge the void from which they rose, the nothing that could perhaps return. From chaos came Gaia, the broad-breasted earth, first of the solid forms, mother of all life. She emerged self-born, without parent or creator, simply manifesting as the foundation upon which everything else would rest. Her body became the hills and valleys, her bones the stones beneath soil, her breath the winds that moved across her surface. Ancient Greeks saw her in every blade of grass, felt her presence in the stability of ground beneath their feet. Gaia was not merely a place, but a living consciousness, aware and powerful, capable of love and terrible anger. From her body grew the mountains, reaching toward the sky she would soon create as her partner. Rivers were her veins, forests her hair, and in the deep places of the earth, her heart beat with the steady rhythm of eternity. She was generous and patient, offering her gifts freely, but those who wounded her learned that even the gentlest earth can quake. Alongside the primordial beings came Eros, though not the cherubic child of later traditions. This was Eros the Elder, the primordial force of desire and connection, the cosmic power that drew things together. Without form or face, this Eros was pure attraction, the principle that made the stars gather, that pulled light toward darkness and darkness toward light. It was the force that ensured creation would not remain scattered and alone, but would unite, combine, and give birth to complexity. The ancient poets understood that without this primal desire, the cosmos would have remained forever separate, each element isolated in eternal loneliness. Eros was the golden thread that wove through all existence, the reason why anything reached toward anything else, why emptiness sought fullness and silence sought sound. Even chaos itself bent to this power, for Eros was older than order, more fundamental than any law. From the first darkness came Nyx, the goddess of night, so ancient and powerful that even Zeus, king of all Olympus, feared to cross her. She emerged from chaos clothed in shadow, her presence a blanket of darkness that covered the earth when light withdrew. Nyx dwelt in a cave in the distant reaches of the cosmos, in Tartarus beyond the edge of the world, where she kept her palace surrounded by eternal mists. When she spread her wings, day fled and stars emerged, each one a pinprick in her dark cloak. She was mother to many deities, giving birth alone to sleep and death, to dreams and blame, to the fates who controlled destiny itself. The ancient Greeks knew night as sacred time, when the boundary between mortal and divine grew thin, when dreams carried messages from the gods. They whispered prayers to Nyx, asking that she keep them safe in darkness, that her children treat them gently. Her power was absolute, for even immortals needed rest. Erebus, the primordial darkness, was Nyx's consort. The deep shadow that existed before light gave darkness meaning. He was not the gentle darkness of evening, but the profound absence of illumination that filled the spaces between worlds. The black that waited in caves and deep waters. Where Nyx was night's active presence, Erebus was the passive void, the shadow realm that served as passage between earth and underworld. Souls of the dead traveled through his domain, crossing from light's realm into shadow's embrace. The ancient poets described him rarely, for he was difficult to comprehend, being neither place nor person, but the concept of obscurity itself. Yet his existence was necessary, for without darkness, light would have no meaning, no contrast, no purpose. Erebus was the background against which all illuminated things became visible, the stage upon which the drama of existence played out in relief. Together, Nyx and Erebus brought forth ether, the bright upper air, the pure light of heaven that gods breathed, distinct from the mortal air below. Ether was radiance itself, the gleaming substance that filled the spaces above the clouds, where Olympus would one day stand. It was transparent yet luminous, neither fire nor air, but something more refined, the element of divine spaces. Mortals who climbed high mountains sometimes caught glimpses of it, that peculiar clarity that made the sky seem closer, more tangible. Ether never dimmed or dulled, maintaining eternal brilliance, untouched by the clouds and storms that roiled in the lower atmosphere. The gods moved through it as easily as fish through water, and in its light, all truth became visible. It was the medium of divine sight, the substance through which prophecy traveled and prayers ascended. Hemera, the day, emerged as Ether's companion, the goddess who brought light to the mortal world each morning. While Ether was the upper light of heaven, Hemera was light's daily gift to earth, the brightness that made life possible for those who walked below. Each dawn she emerged from the edge of the world, scattering the mists of night, allowing mortals to see and work and live. She moved across the sky in an eternal dance with her mother Nyx, one retreating as the other advanced, neither able to fully conquer the other. Ancient Greeks marked time by her passages, structuring their lives around her rhythm. She was gentler than the blazing sun that would come later, her light diffuse and even, the illumination of possibility. When Hemera withdrew at evening, mortals knew to seek shelter and rest, for night's realm belonged to different powers, older and more mysterious than the light they knew. Deep beneath even the earth lay Tartarus, the great abyss, a place so far below the surface that an anvil dropped from earth would fall for 9 days before striking its floor. It was not empty darkness, but a sentient void, a primordial being whose body formed a prison for those who threatened cosmic order. The walls of Tartarus were bronze, extending in all directions without limit, and around it flowed the river of fire and the river of wailing. Ancient poets spoke of it with dread, for Tartarus was where even gods could be confined, where the most ancient and terrible beings waited in chains, No light reached those depths, only the occasional flame from the river's edge, casting shadows that moved with malevolent purpose. The air was thick and heavy, pressing down on anything that descended, and time moved strangely there, stretching moments into eternities. Yet Tartarus was necessary, for without a place to contain chaos, the ordered world above could not exist. It was the universe's shadow self, the forgotten depth that balanced heaven's height. Gaia, yearning for a partner to complete creation, brought forth Urano from her own substance, the starry sky who would cover her as far as she herself extended. Urano was not merely sky, but the heavens themselves, the vast dome that arched over the earth, studded with eternal stars. He was beautiful and terrible, his presence everywhere at once, looking down on all of creation with countless stellar eyes. At night, mortals saw him in his full glory, the great span of darkness pierced by light, and in day they felt him in the blue expanse that seemed to go on forever. Urano and Gaia joined in the first sacred marriage, earth and sky united, and from their union came the first generation of mighty beings. Yet Urano looked upon his children with fear rather than love, for their power reminded him that nothing, not even heaven, remains unchallenged forever. His reign would be long, but not eternal, for the seeds of his overthrow were planted in the moment of his creation. From the union of earth and sky came the Titans, 12 mighty beings who would shape the cosmos before the Olympians rose. First among them were Oceanus and Tethys, the ancient waters, their bodies forming the great river that encircled the world's edge. Oceanus was patient and endless, his current flowing in an eternal circle, neither beginning nor ending, but simply continuing. His consort, Tethys, was mother to 3,000 river daughters and 3,000 stream sons, the oceanids and river gods who filled the earth with flowing water. These titans were gentler than their siblings, preferring to remain in their aquatic realm, watching as the younger gods struggled for power. Ancient sailors prayed to Oceanus when they ventured toward the world's edge, asking safe passage through waters that marked the boundary between known and unknown. His depths were mysterious, holding secrets that even the gods could not fully fathom. Creatures that never saw light and currents that pulled toward places mortals could not follow. Yet his presence was reassuring, for as long as the river flowed, the world held its shape. Hyperion, the titan of heavenly light, blazed with brilliance that preceded the sun itself. He was illumination's principle, light as concept rather than celestial object, and from his union with his sister Theia came the three great lights that would govern mortal time. Their children were Helios, the sun who drove his golden chariot across the sky each day; Selene, the silver moon who ruled the night with gentler radiance; and Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn who opened heaven's gates each morning. Hyperion stood in the east, they said, where light was born, and his presence ensured that darkness would never completely triumph over day. Mortals who woke before dawn sometimes felt him near. That particular quality of pre-light when the world holds its breath before illumination. His power was so fundamental that even after the Titans fell, his children continued their appointed rounds, for the cosmos needed their light to function. Heaven itself was built on his principle that darkness and light must alternate, that time itself was measured in their dance. Coeus and Phoebe, titans of intellect and prophecy, were less known but no less important, their realm the axis of heaven around which the stars turned. Coeus represented the questioning mind, the drive to understand and know, while Phoebe held the answers, bright prophecy and hidden wisdom. Their daughter Leto would one day bear Apollo and Artemis, passing to them gifts of foresight and knowledge. Phoebe held the oracle at Delphi before Apollo claimed it, her prophecies drifting through the cavern like silver mist, cryptic but true. She understood that knowledge was not simple facts but layers of meaning, words that shifted depending on who heard them and when. Coeus studied the heavens, mapping the stars and their movements, seeking patterns in the celestial sphere. Together, they represented the marriage of question and answer, the eternal human drive to understand coupled with the divine response, sometimes clear, often obscured, but always there for those patient enough to listen with more than ears. Crius and Iapetus, titans of the south and west respectively, held their positions at the world's edges, pillars supporting the cosmic order. Crius was associated with the ram and with mastery, his domain the constellations that marked seasons and guided navigation. Iapetus was father to Atlas, Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Menoetius, sons who would play crucial roles in the relationship between gods and mortals. These titans spoke less but endured more, standing at their appointed places while creation unfolded. Iapetus carried the burden of foresight, knowing that his children would suffer for their ambitions, that Atlas would bear the sky's weight and Prometheus would hang in eternal torment. Yet still he brought them forth, for that was his nature, to continue despite knowledge of coming pain. Mortals rarely prayed to these titans directly, yet they felt their presence, that sense of stability and endurance that allowed the world to maintain its structure even as surfaces changed and kingdoms rose and fell. Mnemosyne, titaness of memory, was among the most crucial of her generation, for without her, nothing would persist, no story survive, no lesson pass from one age to another. Her name meant remembrance, and her power ensured that the past did not simply vanish but remained accessible to those who sought it. Zeus himself sought her out, lying with her for 9 consecutive nights, and from that union came the 9 muses who would inspire all human art and science. Memory was the foundation of culture, the bridge between generations, the tool that allowed mortals to learn from what came before. Mnemosyne preserved not just facts, but feelings, the emotional resonance of events that made them meaningful beyond mere occurrence. In her vast mind, every moment that had ever been continued to exist, available to those who could access her gift. She taught that forgetting was as important as remembering, that some things must fade so that others could take their place, but that true wisdom lay in choosing what to preserve and what to release into the mists of time. Themis, titaness of divine law and order, sat in council with Zeus even after the Titans fell, for her power transcended generations. She was not merely rules, but the principle of cosmic rightness, the sense of natural order that made oaths binding and justice necessary. From her lips came prophecies as well as laws, for she could see how actions rippled through time, how breaking natural order created consequences that echoed across ages. She bore to Zeus the Horai, goddesses of the seasons, and the fates themselves, those 3 sisters who controlled every thread of destiny. Themis presided over assemblies, her presence ensuring that proceedings remained orderly and fair. Ancient Greeks invoked her name when swearing oaths, calling upon the fundamental order of the cosmos to witness and enforce their promises. She understood that law was not arbitrary convention but reflection of deeper patterns, that justice was not merely human invention but cosmic principle, Where Themis stood, chaos could not enter, for her very presence imposed structure on potential disorder, making civilization possible. Yet among the Titans, one stood apart in ambition and cunning. Kronos, the youngest and most dangerous of the brothers. Where Oceanus was content with his realm and Hyperion with his light, Kronos looked at his father Urano's rule and saw weakness, saw fear. Urano had imprisoned Kronos' siblings, the Cyclopes and hundred-handed ones, deep in Gaia's body because their appearance frightened him, and Gaia suffered from their confinement. She fashioned a great sickle from adamantine metal, harder than any stone, and offered it to her children, asking who would free her from Urano's constant, oppressive presence. Only Kronos had the courage and ruthlessness to accept. He waited in ambush, and when Urano came to cover Gaia as was his custom, Kronos struck with the sickle, wounding his father grievously. From the blood that fell to earth came the Furies, the Giants, and the Meliae, while drops that fell into the sea created foam from which Aphrodite would be born. Urano retreated into the upper heavens, his power over creation broken, and Kronos claimed rule as the new king of the cosmos. Kronos' reign brought a golden age, or so it seemed at first. He freed some of his siblings from imprisonment and established order among the Titans. He took his sister Rhea as consort, and she was kind and nurturing, goddess of fertility and motherhood, the flow of generations. Yet Urano's last words haunted Kronos, a curse and prophecy combined that just as son had overthrown father, so too would Kronos be defeated by his own child. Fear poisoned what might have been wise rule, transforming the liberator into a tyrant. Kronos became obsessed with preventing the prophecy's fulfillment, his mind turning endlessly on the problem of succession. Rhea grew heavy with their first child, and Kronos pretended joy, but inwardly he schemed, planning the unthinkable. When the child was born, Kronos demanded to hold it, and before Rhea could stop him, he swallowed the infant whole. Rhea's horror was absolute, but Kronos reasoned coldly that what was never released could never pose a threat, and so began his terrible practice. 5 times this happened, 5 children swallowed at birth. First Hestia, gentle goddess of the hearth, then Demeter, who would have blessed the harvest, then Hera, who was born to rule, then Hades, who belonged to deeper realms, and finally Poseidon, lord of seas. Each time Rhea begged and pleaded, but Kronos was unmoved, driven by fear stronger than love. The children remained alive within him, conscious but trapped, growing to full divine power in that dark internal prison. Rhea's grief became rage, and she conspired with Gaia, who remembered her own pain when Urano imprisoned her children. When Rhea's 6th child quickened in her womb, they formed a plan. Rhea traveled in secret to Crete, to a hidden cave on Mount Ida, and there gave birth to Zeus. The infant's cries were masked by the Curettes, young warriors who clashed their shields and spears, creating a din that drowned out all other sound. Rhea wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes and returned to Kronos, offering him the bundle. In his paranoid haste, Kronos swallowed the stone without examining it closely, believing he had defeated the prophecy once more. Zeus grew to maturity in secret, nursed by the goat Amalthea on mountain slopes far from his father's sight. The bees of Mount Ida brought him honey, and nymphs tended him with care, knowing that in this child lay hope for a new order. As Zeus matured, learning his true identity, rage and purpose crystallized within him. Gaia and Rhea guided him, teaching him that strength alone would not defeat Kronos, that he would need allies, need his siblings who waited in terrible darkness inside their father's body. Metis, daughter of Oceanus, provided a potion that would make Kronos disgorge what he had swallowed. Zeus approached his father disguised as a cupbearer and offered a drink. Kronos, suspicious of everyone except one he thought a mere servant, accepted and drank deeply. The potion worked immediately, violently, and Kronos vomited forth first the stone, then, in reverse order, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and finally, Hestia, all of them fully grown and filled with fury at their imprisonment. The war for cosmic supremacy had begun. The war that followed became known as the Titanomachia, a conflict that shook the foundations of existence for 10 full years. Zeus and his siblings established themselves on Mount Olympus, that peak so high it pierced the clouds, while Kronos rallied most of the Titans to Mount Othrys across the Thessalian plain. The cosmos itself became the battlefield, with earthquakes marking each clash, tsunamis rising when Titans fell, and the sky darkening when great powers collided. Neither side could gain decisive advantage, for the Titans had experience and ancient strength, while the Olympians possessed youth's vigor and righteous fury. The earth suffered beneath their combat, mountains crumbling, rivers changing course, forests burning from stray lightning. Mortals who existed then, the people of the Golden Age, hid in caves and prayed to any power that might hear. For when gods make war, creation itself becomes collateral damage. The sound of battle echoed from heaven to Tartarus, a cosmic thunder that never ceased. Zeus knew that victory required more than strength. It required allies his father had carelessly imprisoned. Deep in the earth, in darkness beneath even the deepest roots, the Cyclopes remained chained, along with the 100-handed ones, the Hecatoncheires. These were Gaia's children too, brothers to the Titans, but Urano had feared their power and hidden them away, and Kronos, despite his revolution, had never freed them, too concerned with his own security. Zeus descended into those depths where no light reached, breaking chains that had held for ages, offering freedom and alliance. The Cyclopes, master craftsmen despite their single eyes, were grateful and immediately forged gifts for the three brothers. To Zeus they gave the thunderbolt, that weapon of pure electrical fury that could shatter mountains and make the sky itself speak. For Poseidon they crafted the trident, a three-pronged spear that could command all waters and shake the earth's foundations. To Hades they presented the helm of darkness, which rendered its wearer invisible, allowing passage unseen through any realm. Armed with these weapons, the balance began to shift. The Hecatoncheires, those beings with 100 hands and 50 heads each, were the final piece Zeus needed. Their names were Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, and though their appearance was strange beyond description, their loyalty to those who freed them was absolute. Each of their 100 hands could hurl boulders the size of hills, and they did so with devastating accuracy, raining stone upon the Titans with such ferocity that even mighty Kronos faltered. The Titans, facing weapons and allies they had not anticipated, began to waver. Atlas, strongest of Kronos' warriors, fought with tremendous courage, but even he could not stand against Zeus's lightning combined with the Hecatoncheires' assault. One by one, the Titans were beaten back, their positions overrun, their strength exhausted. Kronos himself faced Zeus in final combat, father against son, the prophecy fulfilling itself despite all attempts to prevent it. The details of that fight were rarely spoken of, for it was terrible to contemplate, but when it ended, Kronos had fallen, and the age of Titans was over. the defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, that bronze-walled abyss deep beneath the earth, where the Hecaton Kairos became their eternal guards, ensuring they would never again threaten the upper world. Yet not all Titans were imprisoned. Oceanus had remained neutral during the war, preferring his endless river to the politics of power, and Zeus respected this, allowing him to continue his ancient flow. Themis too was spared, for her wisdom and justice transcended factional loyalty, and Zeus would often seek her counsel. The others descended into darkness, where time moved strangely, and the weight of defeat pressed heavy on shoulders that had once held power. Atlas received special punishment for his role as Kronos' greatest warrior. Zeus condemned him to stand at the world's western edge, holding the heavens upon his shoulders for eternity, preventing sky from crashing down upon earth. It was a burden that could never be set down, never shared, a weight that grew neither lighter nor heavier, but simply continued, moment after moment, age after age. With victory secured, the three brothers gathered to divide creation among themselves. They cast lots, they said, allowing fate to decide each one's domain, though perhaps there was more negotiation than the simple stories suggest. Zeus received the sky and upper air, becoming Lord of the Heavens, controller of weather and storms, supreme among the gods. His realm was the bright ether above, the clouds and winds, the thunder and rain that blessed or cursed the earth below. Poseidon drew the seas, all the waters that covered most of the world's surface, the depths that hid mysteries even the gods could not fully know. His domain was vast and powerful, second only to Zeus's in prestige. Hades received the underworld, the realm of the dead, the shadowy places beneath the earth where souls journeyed after life's end. Some thought him cheated, given the least desirable realm, but Hades understood what others did not, that all living things eventually came to his domain, that in the end he welcomed everyone. The earth itself and Mount Olympus remained common ground, shared territory where all gods could dwell, though Zeus's palace on Olympus's peak marked his supremacy. Zeus established his throne atop Olympus in a palace of clouds and marble, where the air was always clear and the view extended to the world's edge. From there, he could see all that transpired below, could watch mortals in their cities, could observe his fellow gods in their various pursuits. The thunderbolt rested beside his throne, a constant reminder of his power, ready to be hurled at any who challenged divine order. Zeus was not merely a storm god, but the guarantor of cosmic justice, the enforcer of oaths, the protector of guests and suppliants. Ancient kings claimed descent from him, seeking to legitimize their rule with divine lineage. When Zeus nodded his head in agreement, all of Olympus shook, for his will was law, his decisions final. He took as his symbol the eagle, that bird which flew higher than all others, whose keen eyes missed nothing, whose strength was undeniable. Oak trees became sacred to him, particularly those at Dodona, where the rustling of leaves carried prophetic messages, the trees themselves speaking Zeus's will to those who listened carefully. Yet Zeus's character was complex, containing both justice and passion, wisdom and impulse. His desire was as legendary as his power, and he pursued goddesses and mortal women alike, taking various forms to approach them. A swan, a bull, a shower of gold, whatever shape would achieve his purpose. These unions produced heroes and demigods, beings who bridged the mortal and divine, who carried out great deeds and suffered great tragedies. Some of these pursuits were consensual, others less so, and the resulting children bore both blessing and curse of divine heritage. Europa, Leda, Danae, Io, Alcmaeon. Their names were remembered through their encounters with the king of gods, and their sons, Perseus, Heracles, Helen, became central to Greek mythology's greatest tales. Zeus's appetites created constant tension in divine marriage, drove many plots and counterplots. It also populated the world with extraordinary beings who would shape human history. The Greeks did not judge their chief god by mortal standards, but understood him as a force of nature, powerful and unpredictable as the storms he commanded. Poseidon took his trident and descended to the depths, creating a palace of gold and coral beneath the Aegean Sea. The underwater realm was vast beyond mortal imagination, filled with creatures strange and beautiful, gardens of seaweed that swayed in eternal currents, caves that echoed with sounds no land dweller would ever hear. Poseidon's power over water was absolute. He could raise storms that shattered fleets, calm seas to glass-smooth perfection, or cause earthquakes by striking the ocean floor with his trident. Ancient sailors prayed to him before every voyage, pouring libations of wine into the waves, begging safe passage across his domain. Cities built near the shore maintained his temples prominently, for to ignore the sea, God was to invite disaster. Yet Poseidon was not merely destroyer, but also creator. He brought forth the first horse, they said, by striking a rock with his trident, and the magnificent animal emerged fully formed, mane flowing like ocean foam, powerful and swift. Horses became sacred to him, and he was patron to horsemen and charioteers, protector of those who mastered these noble creatures. Poseidon's temperament matched his element, deep, powerful, sometimes calm, sometimes violent without warning. He bore grudges that lasted generations, as Odysseus learned when he blinded Polyphemus, Poseidon's Cyclops' son, and earned the god's enmity for years of wandering. Yet Poseidon could also be generous to those who honored him properly, granting favorable winds, revealing fresh water springs, protecting ships through dangerous passages. He contested with Athena for patronage of Athens, each offering a gift to win the city's favor. Poseidon struck the Acropolis rock with his trident, and a salt spring gushed forth, demonstrating his power over water. Athena offered an olive tree, symbol of peace and prosperity, and the citizens chose her gift, naming their city in her honor. Poseidon's anger at this rejection was legendary, and some said he flooded the Attic plain in revenge, though eventually he accepted the decision and continued to protect seafarers who departed from Athens's port at Piraeus. Aphrodite became Poseidon's consort, a nereid of extraordinary beauty who initially fled his advances, hiding in the depths near Atlas. Poseidon sent dolphins to find her, and they were so charming in their persuasion that she agreed to return and become queen of the seas. She bore him Triton, the merman herald whose conch shell horn could raise or calm waves, whose fishtail gleamed with scales of silver and blue. Triton served as his father's messenger, swimming through the depths with news and commands, his horn's blast heard across vast distances. Poseidon's palace was said to contain stables for his immortal horses, creatures who could gallop across wave tops without sinking, pulling the god's golden chariot when he chose to travel the ocean's surface. The palace halls echoed with the songs of Nereids, those 50 daughters of Nereus, the old sea god, who danced in Poseidon's court and served Amphitrite. Deep waters held many secrets, creatures that never surfaced, cities that sank beneath waves and remained preserved in eternal twilight, and Poseidon knew them all, guardian and master of the mysterious deep. The trident was Poseidon's symbol and his weapon, its 3 prongs representing the sea god's dominion over the oceans, rivers, and all waters. Made by the Cyclopes from divine materials that never rusted or dulled, the trident could split stone to release springs, summon earthquakes by striking the sea floor, or call forth storms with a gesture. Ancient art depicted Poseidon holding it commandingly, standing in his chariot pulled by hippocampi, those horse-headed fish-tailed creatures that served as his steeds. When he was angry, the trident glowed with a greenish light, they said, and sailors who saw that eerie glow on the horizon knew to seek harbor immediately. Yet the same weapon that destroyed could also create and protect. Poseidon used it to form islands, raising them from the ocean floor as gifts or fortresses. He marked safe channels through dangerous waters, guided lost ships home, and blessed fishermen with abundant catches when properly honored with sacrifices of bulls, whose black hides and powerful builds reminded Greeks of the sea god's strength. Hades descended to his realm beneath the earth, to that kingdom of shadows where the sun never penetrated, and the air was always cool and still. His domain was not a place of punishment alone, but the necessary destination of all mortal souls, regardless of virtue or vice. When humans died, their spirits traveled there, crossing the river Styx in Charon's ferry, paying the 1 obol coin placed on their tongues at burial. Hades ruled this realm with absolute authority, assisted by his ministers and guards, but he rarely left it, preferring the shadows he commanded to Olympus's bright gatherings. The other gods found him somber and unsettling, and mortals feared to speak his name directly, using instead euphemisms like the Rich One or the Host to Many, for death came to everyone eventually, and it seemed unwise to draw his attention. Yet Hades was not evil or cruel, but simply implacable, representing the one certainty that no mortal could escape, that final boundary that even heroes and kings must cross. Cerberus guarded the underworld's gates, a 3-headed dog of enormous size with a serpent's tail and snakes writhing along his back. His 3 heads allowed him to watch in all directions simultaneously, ensuring that no living person entered without Hades' permission, and that no dead soul escaped back to the world above. Cerberus was fierce to those who tried to pass without right, but gentle with the newly dead, even wagging his serpent tail in greeting. The ancient poets described his bark as terrible enough to freeze blood, yet there were stories of heroes who passed him through various means. Orpheus played music so beautiful that all 3 heads fell into peaceful sleep. Heracles wrestled the great hound and dragged him briefly to the surface as one of his labors, though he returned Cerberus unharmed afterward. For even Heracles understood that some boundaries must remain guarded, that the door between life and death must have its keeper. The underworld contained many regions, each suited to different types of souls. The asphodel meadows housed ordinary people, neither greatly virtuous nor particularly wicked, where they drifted as shades in a twilight existence, remembering their former lives but unable to participate in them. It was not torment, but it was not joy either, simply a pale continuation, existence without the intensity of life. Elysium, also called the Isles of the Blessed, was reserved for heroes and the especially righteous, a place of eternal spring where the sun shone gently and souls could rest in peace. There they could feast, compete in games, tell stories of their deeds, and know contentment. Tartarus, deeper still, was where the wicked suffered appropriate punishments, where those who had offended the gods faced eternal consequences. And there, darkest and deepest, the defeated Titans remained imprisoned, guarded by the Hecaton Kairos, their power neutralized but their consciousness intact, remembering ages of glory from cells of shadow. Hades possessed a helm of invisibility, crafted by the Cyclopes, which rendered its wearer completely undetectable. He wore it during the war against the Titans, moving unseen through their ranks, sowing confusion and fear. With this helm, Hades could travel anywhere without being observed, could attend councils on Olympus without announcement, could walk through mortal cities unnoticed. It was a perfect tool for the lord of the unseen realm, for Hades understood that death came quietly, without warning, slipping between moments like a shadow. His other symbol was the cypress tree, that dark evergreen often planted in graveyards, its towering shape pointing toward the sky while its roots reached deep into earth. Black bulls were sacrificed to him, their blood poured into pits dug in the ground, offerings that descended to Hades's realm. He was wealthy beyond measure, for all the precious metals and gems lay in his domain, buried in the earth, and some called him Pluton, the Rich One, acknowledging that Death's kingdom held treasures mortals spent their lives seeking. The most famous story of Hades involved his abduction of Persephone, daughter of Demeter, though the tale's details carried deeper meaning than simple kidnapping. Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow, surrounded by nymphs, when the earth split open and Hades emerged in his black chariot pulled by immortal horses. He had received Zeus's permission for the marriage, though neither had consulted Demeter or Persephone herself. Hades took the girl down into his realm, making her his queen, and when Demeter discovered her daughter's disappearance, her grief was so profound that all growing things withered. For a full year, no crops grew, no flowers bloomed, and mortals began to starve. Zeus, pressured by the suffering below and Demeter's anguish, sent Hermes to negotiate Persephone's return. Hades agreed, but before releasing her, he gave her pomegranate seeds to eat. The act seemed simple kindness, but it bound Persephone to the underworld, for anyone who consumed food in Hades's realm belonged to it at least partially. A compromise was reached that explained the seasons themselves. Persephone would spend part of each year with her mother in the upper world, and during those months, Demeter's joy made everything grow and bloom. But for the other months, Persephone returned to Hades's realm as his queen, and Demeter's sadness brought winter, when the earth slept and waited for her daughter's return. Thus, Persephone held two roles: Kore, the maiden of spring, and Persephone, dread queen of the dead. In the underworld, she ruled beside Hades with surprising strength, showing mercy to some supplicants, enforcing justice on others. She was the one Orpheus begged for Eurydice's return, moved by his music to grant permission, though the conditions proved impossible to meet. Persephone's story taught that transformation was inevitable, that the maiden must sometimes become the queen, that loss and return followed each other in eternal cycle, that even in the darkest places, life found a way to persist and renew itself. Hera, queen of Olympus, was Zeus's sister and ultimately his wife, though their path to marriage was complex. She was born from Rhea and swallowed by Kronos, spending her formative time in her father's dark interior alongside her siblings. When Zeus freed them and the war began, Hera fought with the Olympians, contributing to their victory. Zeus courted her after the Titans' defeat, but Hera initially refused his advances, not wishing to become another conquest. Zeus finally won her through trickery, transforming himself into a small cuckoo bird, bedraggled and cold. Hera, moved by compassion, held the bird to her breast to warm it, and Zeus resumed his true form, compromising her honor so that marriage became necessary. It was a beginning that set the tone for their relationship, Zeus's cunning and desire meeting Hera's pride and standards, a union of power that would shape divine politics for ages to come. Their wedding was celebrated with tremendous grandeur, all the gods attending, bringing gifts and blessings. Gaia gave Hera a tree that bore golden apples, which was planted in a garden at the world's western edge, guarded by the Hesperides and the dragon Ladon. These golden apples were sacred to Hera, symbols of immortality and divine favor. The wedding night lasted 300 years, they said, a divine consummation that established Hera as Zeus's primary consort, queen of all goddesses, second only to Zeus himself in authority. She bore him children: Ares, god of war's fury; Hebe, cupbearer of the gods and personification of youth; and Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth who determined whether labor would be easy or difficult. Some traditions held that Hera alone conceived Hephaestus, creating him without male participation, either as miraculous birth or in retaliation for Zeus's creation of Athena. Hera's domain was marriage itself, the sacred bond between husband and wife that formed society's foundation. Ancient brides prayed to her, asking blessing on their unions, hoping for fertility and harmony. Hera was called Teleia, the complete one, representing marriage's fulfillment, the joining that made two people into a complete whole. Her temples were grand and numerous, particularly in Argos, where her cult was ancient and powerful. The rituals performed in her honor often involved renewal, including a ceremony where Hera's statue was bathed in a sacred spring, symbolically restoring her virginity, representing marriage's eternal renewal. This was not virginity as sexual inexperience, but as autonomy and wholeness, the state of being complete in oneself while choosing partnership with another. Hera's protection extended to all legitimate marriages, and she punished those who violated marriage vows, whether mortal or divine. Yet Hera's marriage to Zeus was famously troubled by his constant infidelities. Zeus's appetites led him to pursue numerous goddesses and mortal women, and each affair wounded Hera's pride and dignity. She could not directly punish Zeus; his power exceeded hers, but she could and did visit consequences upon his lovers and illegitimate children. Leto, pregnant with Apollo and Artemis, was hounded across the earth by Hera until finally finding refuge on the floating island of Delos. Io was transformed into a heifer and tormented by a gadfly that allowed her no rest. Semele was tricked into demanding Zeus reveal himself in his true form, resulting in her incineration by his divine glory. Heracles, Zeus's greatest hero son, faced Hera's enmity throughout his life, driving him to madness, forcing him to complete impossible labors. These vengeful acts made Hera seem cruel, yet, from another perspective, she was defending the institution of marriage itself, insisting that even the king of gods should honor his vows. Hera's symbols carried deep significance, each representing an aspect of her power and nature. The peacock was her sacred bird, its magnificent tail feathers said to contain the 100 eyes of Argus Panoptes, the all-seeing giant she had set to watch over Io. When Hermes slew Argus on Zeus's orders, Hera honored her faithful servant by placing his eyes upon the peacock's plumage, where they remain as iridescent circles, beautiful and eternal. The pomegranate was sacred to her as well, its many seeds representing fertility, abundance within union, the fruitfulness that marriage should bring. She was often depicted holding a scepter topped with a cuckoo bird, reminder of how Zeus had won her, and wearing a crown called the polos, a cylindrical headdress that marked her royal status. The cow, particularly the white heifer, was associated with Hera for its patient strength and nurturing nature. In art, she appeared majestic and severe, beautiful but distant, her gaze direct and assessing, a queen who missed nothing and forgot less. Hera's power extended beyond marriage into sovereignty itself. She was protector of legitimate authority, patron of rightful kings and queens. Cities that honored her properly received her blessing. Stability, prosperity, the continuation of royal lines. Her anger, when roused, was formidable and long-lasting. She drove Dionysus to madness for being Zeus's illegitimate son, causing him to wander the earth in confusion before he eventually recovered and ascended to Olympus. She supported the Greeks in the Trojan War, partly because Paris had judged Aphrodite more beautiful than her, a slight Hera never forgave. Her role in the Iliad showed both her majesty and her vindictiveness, her willingness to manipulate and scheme to achieve her goals. Yet this same intensity meant that those under her protection received unwavering support. Hera understood power, how to wield it, how to maintain it, and she taught that dignity must be defended, that honor once lost was nearly impossible to fully restore. From Zeus's head came Athena, born fully grown and armored, her birth cry so fierce it shook heaven and earth. The circumstances were unusual even by divine standards. Zeus had taken Metis, Titaness of wisdom and cunning, as his first consort. But when she became pregnant, he learned of a prophecy that her second child would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Kronos. Rather than risk this fate, Zeus swallowed Metis whole while she was still pregnant with their first child. Metis continued to exist within him, offering counsel, but the child grew in Zeus's head, and as the pregnancy progressed, he suffered terrible headaches. Finally, the pain became unbearable, and Zeus asked Hephaestus to strike his skull with an axe. From the cleft leaped Athena, already adult, clad in golden armor, brandishing a spear, her gray eyes flashing with intelligence. She was wisdom incarnate, born from thought itself, and Zeus loved her immediately, for she embodied his best qualities without threatening his rule. Athena became goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and civilized arts. Where Ares represented war's chaos and bloodlust, Athena embodied its tactical aspects, planning, strategy, the disciplined courage that won battles through intelligence rather than mere violence. She was patron of heroes who combined strength with cleverness. Odysseus, whom she favored for his cunning mind. Perseus, whom she guided in slaying Medusa. Heracles, whom she helped complete his labors. Athena's wisdom extended beyond warfare to all civilized pursuits. She taught mortals how to build ships, tame horses, create pottery, and weave cloth. Her own weaving was flawless, her tapestries containing images so lifelike they seemed to breathe. When the mortal woman Arachne claimed to weave better than Athena, the goddess accepted the challenge, and both created magnificent works. Arachne's depicted the gods' scandals and imperfections, while Athena's showed divine majesty and the consequences of hubris. The contest ended with Arachne transformed into a spider, doomed to weave forever, a reminder that mortals should not compete with immortals. Athens was Athena's city, named in her honor after she won it in competition with Poseidon. The contest took place on the Acropolis, that high rocky outcrop overlooking the plain of Attica. the gods judged, and the citizens would choose based on which gift they preferred. Poseidon struck the rock with his trident, and a spring gushed forth, demonstrating his power over water, though the water was salt and not useful for drinking. Athena planted an olive tree, the first of its kind, offering oil for cooking and lighting, wood for building, and a symbol of peace and prosperity. The citizens, impressed by the practicality and symbolism of Athena's gift, chose her as their patron. She became deeply invested in Athens' welfare, protecting it through wars, guiding its heroes, inspiring its philosophers. The Parthenon, that magnificent temple on the Acropolis, housed a massive statue of Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin, made of gold and ivory, holding a small statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, in her palm. It stood as testament to Athenian devotion and the goddess's protective presence. Athena's virginity was central to her identity, representing her autonomy and independence. She was Parthenos, the maiden, belonging to no one, complete in herself. This was not merely absence of sexual relations, but a statement of self-sufficiency and freedom from male authority. Along with Artemis and Hestia, she formed a triad of virgin goddesses who refused marriage and maintained their independence despite numerous suitors. Hephaestus once pursued her, and when he tried to force himself upon her, she fought him off, and his seed fell upon the earth, from which Erichthonius was born. Athena took the child under her protection, raising him in her temple, and he eventually became a king of Athens. Her gray eyes, often described as owl-like, missed nothing, seeing through deception to truth beneath. The owl became her sacred bird, symbol of wisdom and nocturnal watchfulness. At night, when most slept, the owl hunted with precision and silence, just as Athena's wisdom operated, patient, observant, striking at the perfect moment. The aegis was Athena's most feared attribute, a goatskin shield or breastplate bearing the face of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned living things to stone. After Perseus slew Medusa with Athena's guidance, he gave the severed head to the goddess, and she mounted it upon her aegis, making her protection all the more terrifying to enemies. When Athena shook the aegis, it created thunder and terror in those who opposed her. She was both guardian and warrior, her protection fierce and her judgment severe. Those who broke oaths sworn in her name, who violated the laws of civilized society, who threatened the innocent, these faced her wrath. Yet she was also capable of mercy and guidance, teaching rather than simply punishing, showing mortals the path toward wisdom if they proved willing to learn. Her temples were places of sanctuary, where suppliants could seek refuge, knowing that Athena protected those who came to her in good faith. Far from cities and civilization, in the wild mountains and deep forests, Artemis roamed with her band of nymphs, virgin huntresses who had dedicated themselves to the goddess's service. Artemis was Apollo's twin sister, born on the island of Delos just after her brother. And even in infancy, she displayed remarkable independence and strength. She asked Zeus to grant her eternal virginity, a silver bow and arrows, a short tunic suitable for hunting, mountains and wilderness as her domain, and nymphs to accompany her. Zeus granted all these requests, delighted by his daughter's clarity of purpose. Artemis became goddess of the hunt, the wild places, and, paradoxically, of childbirth, for she had helped her mother Leto deliver Apollo despite being newborn herself. Ancient women in labor called upon Artemis, asking for swift and safe delivery, and those who died in childbirth were said to have been struck by her gentle arrows, claiming them quickly to spare prolonged suffering. Artemis was fierce in defending her virginity and that of her companions. When the hunter Actaeon stumbled upon her bathing in a secluded pool, she transformed him into a stag, and his own hunting dogs, not recognizing their master, tore him apart. The punishment seemed harsh, but Artemis would not tolerate even accidental violation of her privacy, maintaining absolute boundaries around her person and her followers. Her nymphs, who broke their vows of chastity, faced similar consequences. Callisto, one of her favorites, was seduced by Zeus and became pregnant. When Artemis discovered the pregnancy during a communal bath, she transformed Callisto into a bear and drove her from the group. Later, Zeus placed Callisto among the stars as Ursa Major, the great bear constellation that circles the northern sky eternally. Artemis's standards were exacting, her expectations clear, and her followers accepted these terms gladly, preferring wild freedom to domestic constraint. The hunt was sacred ritual for Artemis, not mere sport but communion with the wild. She and her nymphs pursued deer, boar, and other game through forests and across mountains, their arrows finding marks with supernatural accuracy. Artemis carried a golden bow, gift from the Cyclopes, and her arrows brought swift death, whether to animals or, when necessary, to mortals who offended the gods. Yet she was also protector of young animals, particularly those not yet old enough to hunt. Hunters made offerings to her before expeditions, asking permission to take game from her domain, promising to kill cleanly and waste nothing. She taught respect for the wilderness, the understanding that humans were part of nature, not its masters, and that taking life required acknowledging the sacred transaction involved. Forests where Artemis was honored remained healthy and abundant, while those who hunted without respect found their prey vanishing, their arrows missing marks, their expeditions meeting with mysterious accidents. Artemis appeared in many forms and under many titles across the Greek world. In Ephesus, she was worshipped as a fertility goddess, her ancient statue showing multiple breasts or perhaps rows of eggs or bull testicles, symbols of abundant life. This seemed to contradict her virgin nature, yet the Greeks understood that virginity did not mean sterility. Artemis blessed fertility in nature even while maintaining her own independence. She was Artemis Agroterra, the huntress, Artemis Locaea, helper in childbirth, Artemis Potnia Theron, mistress of animals. The moon became associated with her, though originally Selene was the moon's deity. Artemis's connection was to the lunar cycle's influence on women's bodies, on tides, on the rhythms of wild creatures. Her chariot was pulled by 4 golden-horned deer, creatures she had captured in the forests, and she roamed the night sky as well as earthly wilderness, her presence felt wherever nature remained untamed. The youngest of the Olympians in birth but eldest in honor was Hestia, firstborn child of Cronus and Rhea, first swallowed and last to be freed when Zeus made their father disgorge his children. This paradox of being both first and last suited her nature perfectly. Hestia was goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire at the center of every home and every city. Her presence was subtle but absolutely essential, for without the hearth there was no home, no center around which family gathered, no warmth against the cold, no fire for cooking or light. Every meal began and ended with offerings to Hestia, the first portion and the last, honoring her fundamental importance even though she appeared in fewer myths than the other Olympians. She chose to remain on Olympus, tending the divine hearth, while Dionysus took the 12th throne among the great gods. This was not demotion, but preference. Hestia cared nothing for politics or glory, content with her essential role. Hestia's virginity, like that of Athena and Artemis, was crucial to her nature. Both Poseidon and Apollo courted her, powerful gods seeking alliance through marriage, but Hestia refused both, asking Zeus to allow her to remain unmarried forever. Zeus granted her request and gave her place of honor at Olympus's hearth. Her virginity represented the home's sanctity, the domestic space as refuge from external chaos. The hearth was the house's heart, and Hestia's purity kept it uncorrupted by outside influences. New brides carried fire from their mother's hearth to kindle the first flames in their new homes, transferring Hestia's blessing to the next generation. Cities maintained a public hearth in the Prytaneum, the civic building's center, and this fire burned continuously, tended by virgin priestesses. If it went out, disaster might follow, for Hestia's presence protected the community. Colonists departing to establish new cities carried fire from the mother city's hearth, maintaining connection through Hestia's flame. Unlike the other Olympians, Hestia rarely appeared in myths or involved herself in divine politics. She had no great adventures, no famous conflicts, no dramatic romances. Yet this quiet presence was her strength. While other gods competed and quarreled, Hestia remained constant, the still center around which everything else revolved. Philosophers noted this, seeing in Hestia a representation of cosmic stability, the fixed point that allowed all else to move. In homes, her place was the hearth. In temples, the altar's eternal flame. In the cosmos itself, some said the earth's central fire. Every sacrifice to any god began and ended with offering to Hestia, acknowledging that even divine honors required the foundation she provided. She was gentle and welcoming, offering shelter to those who needed it, warmth to those who were cold, gathering places for those who were scattered. In a world of conflict and change, Hestia represented continuity and peace, the enduring values that outlasted temporary excitements. The proverb, Hestia comes first, expressed both ritual practice and deeper truth. In sacrifices, she received the first offerings. In oaths, her name came before others. In the ordering of the cosmos, her principle of centeredness and home preceded all other considerations. Ancient Greeks understood that before heroes could quest, before armies could march, before cities could grow great, there must be a hearth to return to, a center that remained constant. Hestia provided this without fanfare or demand for recognition. Her temples were few because every hearth was her shrine, every home her sanctuary. To honor Hestia, one need only tend the fire, keep the home clean, offer hospitality to guests, maintain family bonds. These simple acts held profound meaning, for they sustained civilization more surely than spectacular deeds. When families gathered around evening fires, telling stories, sharing meals, finding comfort in each other's presence, they enacted Hestia's sacred ritual, whether they named her explicitly or not. On the island of Delos, after days of labor, Leto finally gave birth to Apollo and Artemis, the divine twins who would become two of Olympus's greatest powers. The birth was difficult because Hera, jealous of Zeus's affair with Leto, had prevented Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, from attending. All the goddesses except Hera had gathered on Delos to support Leto, and they sent Iris to Olympus with gifts for Eileithyia, bribing her to come despite Hera's prohibition. Artemis was born first and immediately assisted with Apollo's delivery, demonstrating the strength and independence that would mark her nature. When Apollo emerged, Delos, previously a floating island, became anchored to the sea floor, stabilized by the god's presence. Swans circled the island 7 times, their white wings catching the light, and from that moment, swans became sacred to Apollo, symbols of beauty and prophecy. Apollo grew with supernatural speed, as divine children did, fed on nectar and ambrosia by Themis. Within days, he had reached full maturity, already wielding the silver bow crafted for him by Hephaestus. His first act was to seek revenge against Python, the enormous serpent that had pursued his mother during her pregnancy at Hera's instigation. Python dwelt at Delphi, coiled around the Earth's navel stone, guarding the ancient oracle that had belonged first to Gaia, then to Themis. Apollo tracked the serpent to its lair and filled it with arrows, his aim perfect despite his youth. Python died slowly, its massive body writhing in death throes, its blood soaking into the earth. This slaying established Apollo's power, but also required purification, for killing even a monstrous serpent had religious implications. Apollo traveled to the Vale of Tempe in Thessaly, underwent purification rites, and returned to claim Delphi as his oracle, the most important prophetic site in all of Greece. The oracle at Delphi became Apollo's greatest gift to mortals, a place where the god spoke through his priestess, the Pythia, offering guidance to individuals and cities alike. The Pythia would descend into the temple's inner chamber, seat herself on a tripod over a chasm in the earth, and breathe vapors that rose from below. In trance, she spoke Apollo's prophecies, her words often cryptic, requiring interpretation by the temple priests. Kings and commoners alike consulted the oracle before major decisions, whether to go to war, where to found colonies, how to end plagues or famines. Delphi's influence shaped Greek history, its pronouncements affecting the outcomes of wars and the fates of nations. The temple's entrance bore the maxims, "Know thyself," and "Nothing in excess," expressing Apollonian values of self-awareness and moderation. Pilgrims arrived bearing gifts, hoping Apollo would look favorably on their questions, and the temple grew wealthy from their offerings, becoming one of the ancient world's great treasuries. Apollo was god of prophecy, but also of music, poetry, healing, and the sun, though originally Helios drove the solar chariot across the sky. Apollo's association with the sun came later, merging his bright nature with the literal source of light. The lyre was his instrument, a gift from Hermes after the young god had stolen Apollo's cattle as an infant. Hermes fashioned the first lyre from a tortoise shell and offered it to Apollo in compensation, and the music god was so enchanted by the instrument that he forgave the theft. When Apollo played, rivers stopped flowing to listen, wild animals forgot their hunger, and even stones were moved by the beauty of his melodies. The Muses, those 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, followed Apollo, making him their leader, Musagetes, the one who guided all artistic inspiration. He taught mortals the principles of music and poetry, showing how words and sounds could combine to create beauty that transcended ordinary speech. Yet Apollo could be harsh as well as beautiful, his arrows bringing sudden death as surely as his music brought joy. He and Artemis slew the children of Niobe, who had boasted of having more children than Leto, foolishly comparing herself favorably to the goddess. Apollo killed Niobe's sons while Artemis struck down her daughters, and Niobe, frozen in grief, was transformed into a stone that wept eternally. Apollo flayed the satyr Marsyas after the foolish creature challenged him to a musical contest and lost. a reminder that mortals should not compete with gods. The plague could come from Apollo's arrows, as it did in the Iliad's opening, when he struck the Greek camp with disease to punish Agamemnon's disrespect toward Apollo's priest. Yet the same god who brought plague could also heal it, for Apollo understood medicine, passing knowledge to his son Asclepius, who became the greatest physician. Apollo's nature contained these contradictions: beauty and terror, healing and harm, order and sudden violence, making him one of the most complex Olympians. The laurel tree became sacred to Apollo through tragedy rather than triumph. He pursued the nymph Daphne, daughter of the river god Peneus, but she desired only to remain free, hunting with Artemis, uninterested in marriage or romance. Apollo's desire grew more intense with her refusals, and finally she fled from him in desperation. As he gained on her, drawing close enough to touch her flowing hair, Daphne called out to her father for help, begging transformation rather than capture. Peneus heard his daughter's plea and changed her even as Apollo's hands reached for her. Her feet rooted into earth, her skin became bark, her arms stretched into branches, her hair transformed into leaves. Apollo embraced not the nymph, but the tree she had become, feeling her heart still beating beneath the bark. In grief and love, he declared the laurel sacred to himself, wearing its leaves as a crown, decreeing that victors in athletic and artistic competitions would be crowned with laurel wreaths. The tree remained eternally green, never losing its leaves, a reminder of the love that could not be fulfilled but would never fade. Apollo's role as god of prophecy meant he understood fate's workings, could see threads of destiny that remained hidden from others. Yet even his knowledge had limits, for some things were decreed by the Moirai themselves, those three fates who answered to no one, not even Zeus. Apollo could reveal what would happen, but rarely could he change it, a frustration that marked several of his myths. He warned Cassandra of Troy's fall, gave her the gift of prophecy in an attempt to win her love, but when she still refused him, he cursed her so that no one would believe her true visions. He told Oedipus's parents the terrible prophecy that their son would kill his father and marry his mother. But the prophecy fulfilled itself despite all attempts at prevention. Apollo's oracles spoke truth, but truth that mortals often misunderstood or tried futilely to avoid, learning that fate, once spoken, moved inevitably toward completion like water flowing downhill, taking the path of least resistance but always reaching its destination. Hyacinth was a beautiful Spartan prince whom Apollo loved deeply, teaching him athletics and music, spending long days in companionship. One afternoon, they competed throwing the discus, enjoying the contest and each other's company. Apollo threw first, his divine strength sending the discus flying far across the field. Hyacinth ran after it, eager to match Apollo's feat, but the discus struck a stone and bounced back with terrible force, hitting the young man in the head. Apollo rushed to his side, tried to use all his healing knowledge to stop the bleeding, but even a god could not reverse this particular wound. As Hyacinth died in Apollo's arms, the god's grief was profound, for he had loved the mortal truly. From the blood that soaked into earth, Apollo caused a flower to spring forth, the hyacinth, marked with petals that some claimed showed the letters AI, a cry of lament. The flower returned each spring, blue and fragrant, a memorial to beauty lost too soon. Apollo's temple at Delphi grew to become the cultural center of the Greek world, not merely an oracle but a gathering place for the Hellenic peoples. Every 4 years, the Pythian Games were held there. second in importance only to the Olympics, celebrating Apollo through athletic competitions, musical contests, and dramatic performances. Victors received crowns of laurel and eternal glory, their names recorded in temple records, their achievements celebrated in songs that spread across the Mediterranean. The sacred way leading to the temple was lined with treasuries built by various city-states, each trying to outdo the others in architectural splendor, filling these buildings with offerings of gold, silver, and precious art. Pilgrims traveled from distant lands, waiting sometimes for days to consult the oracle, the journey itself a form of spiritual preparation. The sanctuary's location, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus with views across the valley, inspired awe, as if the gods had deliberately chosen a place where earth and sky met in perfect harmony. Aphrodite rose from sea foam near the island of Cyprus, though her origins were told in different ways. Hesiod wrote that she was born from the foam that formed when Kronos' blade wounded Urano, the drops of divine blood mingling with the sea to create something entirely new. She emerged fully grown, more beautiful than any being yet born. And as she stepped onto the shore at Paphos, flowers bloomed beneath her feet, grass turned greener, the air itself seemed to warm and sweeten. The Horae, goddesses of the seasons, met her there, clothing her in divine garments and adorning her with jewelry that complemented rather than competed with her natural beauty. Wherever Aphrodite walked, desire followed. Not merely sexual attraction, but the fundamental force that draws beings together, that makes isolation unbearable and union necessary. She was love and beauty personified, but also the terrible power of desire, which could elevate or destroy, bring ecstasy or madness, unite lovers or shatter kingdoms. Homer told a different story, making Aphrodite daughter of Zeus and the Oceanid Dion, born on Olympus rather than from the sea. Both traditions were honored in different regions, but the image of the goddess rising from foam captured Greek imagination more vividly, appearing countless times in art and poetry. The sea connection remained strong regardless of which birth story one preferred. Sailors prayed to Aphrodite for calm waters. Her favor could mean safe voyages, while her anger brought storms. She was called Aphrodite Anadyomene, she who emerges, and paintings showed her wringing seawater from her long hair, surrounded by dolphins and sea nymphs, as if the ocean itself had dreamed her into existence. Cyprus became her sacred island, its groves and beaches dedicated to her worship, temples where priestesses performed rites celebrating love and fertility, where marriages were blessed and new relationships begun under divine auspices. Zeus arranged Aphrodite's marriage to Hephaestus, the craftsman god, perhaps thinking that wedding her to the least threatening Olympian would prevent conflicts over the beautiful goddess. Hephaestus was grateful for the match, having been rejected and mocked for his appearance, and he created magnificent jewelry for his wife, gifts that demonstrated his affection and skill. But Aphrodite felt no love for her husband, finding him unappealing despite his gentleness and artistry. Instead, she turned to Ares, god of war, finding in his violence and passion something that called to her own nature. Their affair was intense and poorly concealed, for how could the goddess of love hide her own desire? The other gods whispered and joked about it, but Hephaestus remained unaware until Helios, the all-seeing sun, took pity on him and revealed the truth. Hephaestus's response combined his pain with his cleverness. He forged an unbreakable net of chains so fine they were invisible, and he set this trap over his marriage bed. The net caught Aphrodite and Ares together, exposing them in the midst of their passion, unable to move or cover themselves. Hephaestus called all the Olympian gods to witness his shame, showing them the proof of his wife's betrayal. The gods came, and the scene was awkward. Some were genuinely shocked, others fought to hide laughter. Many felt sympathy for Hephaestus's humiliation. Apollo remarked to Hermes that he wouldn't mind being caught in such chains if it meant lying with Aphrodite, and Hermes agreed, a comment that lightened the mood, but also acknowledged Aphrodite's overwhelming desirability. Poseidon finally interceded, promising that Ares would pay appropriate compensation, and Hephaestus released the lovers. Aphrodite fled to Cyprus in shame, while Ares went to Thrace, but neither suffered lasting consequences. From their union came several children, including Harmonia, who married Cadmus, and Eros, the young god of love who served as his mother's companion and agent. Aphrodite's power extended far beyond personal attraction. She could influence the course of wars by making commanders desire peace or conflict. She swayed political alliances through marriages she blessed or cursed. The golden girdle she wore, the Kestos Hemas, contained all the powers of desire. Whoever saw her wearing it, whether god or mortal, fell immediately under her spell, finding her absolutely irresistible. Even Hera once borrowed this girdle when she wanted to distract Zeus from the Trojan War, and it worked perfectly, making Zeus desire her so strongly he forgot everything else. Aphrodite's favor brought beauty, passion, and joy, but her displeasure brought consequences just as powerful. When the women of Lemnos neglected her worship, she cursed them with a terrible smell that drove their husbands to seek other partners. When Hippolytus rejected love entirely, dedicating himself only to Artemis, Aphrodite arranged his destruction through his stepmother's false passion and his father's curse. The goddess moved through the world accompanied by Eros, Himeros, desire, and Pothos, longing, divine personifications of love's various aspects. Doves drew her chariot, their soft cooing and gentle flight matching her graceful nature. Roses bloomed wherever she walked, their beauty and thorns both reflecting love's dual nature. Sweetness combined with danger. The myrtle tree was sacred to her, its fragrant leaves used in wedding ceremonies and love rituals. Aphrodite was worshipped throughout the Greek world, but her cults varied significantly. In Sparta, she appeared as Aphrodite Araya, the warlike, carrying weapons and associated with victory. In Corinth, her temple employed sacred prostitutes whose services honored the goddess. In Athens, she was Aphrodite Pandemos, goddess of common love, protector of all citizens' relationships, not merely romantic passion, but the bonds that held communities together. She contained multitudes, this goddess, from the highest spiritual love to base physical desire, from marriage bed to battlefield, proving that love itself was the most complex force in existence. Ares was the god least loved among the Olympians, for while Athena embodied war's noble aspects, Ares represented its bloodlust and chaos. He delighted in battle's confusion, the clash of weapons, the cries of dying men, the smell of blood soaking into earth. Ares charged into combat with fury but little strategy, fighting for the joy of violence itself rather than for any particular cause. The other gods found him distasteful. Zeus himself declared that Ares was his least favorite child, too much like his mother Hera in temper, too willing to fight without thinking. Yet Ares was necessary, for war was part of human experience, and someone had to embody its reality. Mortals prayed to Athena for victory, but acknowledged Ares as the one who truly understood battle's terrible nature, who appeared in the press of combat when rational thought fled and only instinct remained. Thrace became Ares's favored land, that wild northern region where tribes valued martial prowess above all else. There, Ares found worship and respect that eluded him elsewhere. His companions were Deimos and Phobos, fear and panic, his sons who followed him into battle, spreading terror among warriors. Enyo, goddess of war's destruction, also accompanied him, along with Eris, discord personified, who delighted in setting allies against each other. This was Ares's retinue, not noble or inspiring, but brutally honest about war's nature. In the Iliad, Ares fought for Troy, and Athena faced him directly, striking him with a boulder so hard he fell to the ground covering 7 acres. Even wounded, Ares's cry was terrible, like the roar of 10,000 men, and he fled to Olympus complaining to Zeus, who had little sympathy. The message was clear. Raw violence without wisdom or justice would always fall to disciplined courage guided by intelligence. Yet Ares had his softer aspects, visible primarily in his relationship with Aphrodite. With her, the war god became gentle, even tender, showing that beneath the rage lay capacity for devotion and passion. Their children included Harmonia, whose name meant harmony, the union of love and strife creating balance. The Greeks understood this pairing, that love and war, creation and destruction, beauty and violence were linked, that passion could express itself in multiple ways. Ares's sacred animals were the vulture and the dog, creatures associated with death and battlefields. His bird was the woodpecker, whose aggressive hammering echoed the sound of spear on shield. In art, Ares appeared powerful and athletic, often nude or lightly armored, carrying spear and shield, his expression fierce. Unlike Athena's thoughtful gaze, Ares looked forward with single-minded intensity, seeing only the next opponent, the next fight, living always in battle's immediate present. Hephaestus was the only Olympian with obvious physical imperfection, and the stories of how he became lame varied. Some said that Hera, disappointed by his appearance at birth, threw him from Olympus in disgust, and the fall left him permanently injured. Others claimed that Hephaestus was born perfect, but later, when he defended Hera during a quarrel with Zeus, the king of gods threw him from heaven, and he fell for a full day before landing on the island of Lemnos, shattering his legs. Either way, the message was troubling. Even divine parents rejected children who didn't meet expectations, and even among immortals, physical appearance mattered. Yet this rejection shaped Hephaestus into something remarkable. Thetis and Eurynome rescued him, raising him in a sea cave where he learned his craft, and the trauma of rejection transformed into dedication to artistry. His workshop became his sanctuary, his creations his voice, his skill undeniable even to those who mocked his appearance. Hephaestus's forge lay beneath volcanoes, particularly under Mount Etna in Sicily, where the Cyclopes served as his assistants. The mountain's smoke and occasional eruptions were said to come from his furnaces, the rumbling from his hammers striking divine metal on cosmic anvils. There he created wonders that surpassed anything mortals could imagine. He forged Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades's helm of invisibility. He made Achilles' armor at Thetis's request, shield so detailed it contained entire worlds, cities at peace and at war, fields being plowed, vineyards being harvested, all rendered in precious metals with such skill they seemed alive. He crafted Pandora, the first woman, shaping her from clay with such artistry that Even the gods marveled, though the life Zeus breathed into her would bring sorrow to mortals. Hephaestus created automatons, mechanical servants who assisted in his workshop, moving and working as if truly alive, demonstrating mastery over materials that bordered on divine magic. Despite being cuckolded by Aphrodite, Hephaestus remained essential to Olympus, for the gods needed his skills constantly. He built their palaces, forged their weapons, created the jewelry and thrones that marked their status. His work appeared everywhere. The golden robots that served Hephaestus himself, the brazen bulls that breathed fire, the unbreakable chains that bound Prometheus to his rock. Mortals honored Hephaestus as patron of craftsmen, blacksmiths, sculptors, and all who worked with their hands to create useful and beautiful objects. His festivals involved processions of artisans displaying their finest work, competitions of skill, and offerings of tools symbolically given to the god before being put to practical use. Hephaestus showed that worth wasn't determined by physical beauty or social grace, but by what one could create, by the legacy of craft that outlasted the craftsman. His story comforted the rejected and elevated the skilled, teaching that limitation could become the foundation of greatness. Hermes was born in a cave on Mount Cyllene in Arcadia, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia. His nature revealed itself immediately, for on his very first day of life, the infant god demonstrated cleverness that presaged his future role. He slipped out of his cradle while Maia slept, found a tortoise near the cave's entrance, and conceived of the lyre. He killed the tortoise, cleaned its shell, attached arms of horn, and strung it with sheep gut, creating the first musical instrument. That same day, his appetite for mischief not yet satisfied, baby Hermes traveled to Pieria, where Apollo kept cattle. He stole 50 cows, driving them backward so their tracks would confuse pursuers, and he made himself sandals that obscured his own footprints. Apollo eventually tracked him down through divination and clever investigation, but Hermes played innocent, lying in his cradle wrapped in swaddling clothes, claiming to be a mere baby who knew nothing of cattle. Apollo brought him before Zeus to settle the matter, and even Zeus struggled not to laugh at his infant son's audacious cunning. The theft resolved through negotiation rather than punishment. Hermes produced the lyre he had invented and played music so beautiful that Apollo immediately desired the instrument. They struck a bargain. Hermes would return the cattle and give Apollo the lyre, while Apollo would grant Hermes authority over herds and flocks, making him patron of shepherds. Later, Hermes invented the shepherd's pipe, the syrinx, and traded it to Apollo for the golden staff that became his symbol, the caduceus, entwined with 2 serpents and topped with wings. From these exchanges, Hermes became associated with trade, commerce, and negotiation, the god who facilitated exchanges and transactions, who understood that value was relative and everything had its price. He was the god of merchants and messengers, quick-tongued speakers and clever traders, those who lived by wits rather than strength, who saw opportunity where others saw only obstacles. Zeus appointed Hermes as divine herald and messenger, the one who carried pronouncements from Olympus to earth and back. For this role, Hermes received winged sandals that allowed him to fly swift as thought, covering vast distances in moments. He wore a traveler's hat, the Petassos, also winged, and carried the caduceus, which could put mortals to sleep or wake them with a touch. Hermes alone could move freely between all realms, from Olympus to earth to the underworld. No boundary constrained him. No door remained locked against him. This freedom made him perfect intermediary, carrying messages between hostile parties, facilitating communication that would otherwise be impossible. He brought dreams from the gods to sleeping mortals, whispered divine inspiration to poets and inventors, guided travelers on dangerous roads, and protected those who ventured into unknown territories. His roadside shrines, called herms, stood at crossroads and boundaries, marking transitions and offering protection to those in liminal spaces. Hermes served as psychopomp, guide of souls to the underworld, leading the newly dead from life's realm to Hades's domain. This was sacred duty, performed countless times each day, for mortals died constantly and each soul needed guidance. Hermes appeared to the dying, gentle and encouraging, helping them release their bodies and accept their new form. He led them down through darkness to the river Styx, where Charon waited to ferry them across. Without Hermes' guidance, souls might wander lost, unable to find their way to proper rest. The god's presence made death less frightening, for he embodied transition, showing that endings were also beginnings, that crossing boundaries, even the final one, was natural and necessary. Ancient Greeks buried their dead with coins, payment for Charon, and they said prayers invoking Hermes, asking him to guide their loved ones safely to rest in Hades's shadowy meadows. Dionysus was born twice, earning the title Twice Born, a miracle that demonstrated both Zeus's power and the god's own resilience. His mother was Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, and Zeus loved her truly, visiting her in mortal form to spare her his divine radiance. Hera, learning of yet another affair, disguised herself as an old woman and befriended Semele, planting doubts in the young woman's mind. She suggested that if Zeus truly loved Semele, he would reveal himself in his full glory as he appeared to Hera. Semele, convinced by this logic, asked Zeus to grant her one wish, and he swore by the river Styx to give her anything. When she asked to see him as he truly was, Zeus was horrified, for he knew what would happen, but an oath sworn on the Styx could not be broken even by the king of gods. He appeared in his divine form, thunder and lightning manifesting with him, and Semele was consumed instantly by the overwhelming power, her mortal body unable to withstand such glory. Zeus moved swiftly to save their unborn child. He snatched the fetus from Semele's remains and sewed it into his own thigh, allowing the pregnancy to complete in his divine body. When the time came, Dionysus emerged from Zeus's thigh, fully divine, having gestated first in mortal womb and then in immortal flesh. This dual birth gave Dionysus unique perspective, understanding both mortal and divine existence, belonging fully to neither world, yet touching both. Hermes took the infant to be raised by nymphs on Mount Nysa, hiding him from Hera's continuing rage. The god grew among women, learning their mysteries, developing the gentler aspects that would mark his cult even as he embodied wine's wildness. His childhood was happy but hidden, preparation for the extraordinary journey that would make him the last god to join the Olympian 12. Dionysus traveled widely as a young god, bringing the gift of wine to mortals and establishing his worship. He journeyed through Egypt, Syria, and as far as India, they said, teaching viticulture and the proper rituals for honoring the wine god. His followers were primarily women, the Maenads, or Bacchae, who experienced religious ecstasy in his rites, dancing wildly in mountains and forests, crowned with ivy and wielding the thyrsus, a fennel staff topped with pine cone. In their ecstatic state, the Maenads possessed superhuman strength and felt no pain, tearing apart animals with bare hands, singing and dancing until exhaustion claimed them. These rites disturbed many Greeks, particularly men who saw their wives and daughters disappearing into the wilderness to worship a god who seemed to promise liberation from society's constraints. Yet Dionysus's cult spread inexorably, for the god offered something other Olympians did not: direct experience of the divine, transformation of consciousness, temporary escape from the self. The wine Dionysus gave mortals was a double-edged gift, bringing joy and destruction in equal measure. Properly diluted and drunk in moderation, wine loosened tongues, inspired poetry, made celebrations memorable. It was drunk at symposia where men discussed philosophy, recited verses, debated politics. Wine accompanied religious festivals, libations poured to honor all the gods. But undiluted or taken in excess, wine brought madness, violence, and tragedy. Dionysus showed mortals both faces of his gift. King Pentheus of Thebes tried to ban Dionysian worship, imprisoning followers and threatening the god himself. Dionysus drove Pentheus mad, making him dress as a woman to spy on the Maenads, then ensured the king's own mother, in ecstatic frenzy, tore him apart without recognizing her son. The lesson was clear. Denying Dionysus brought worse madness than embracing him. Better to honor the god and accept wine's dual nature than to pretend it could be controlled or eliminated. The mysteries of Dionysus, particularly those at Eleusis where his worship merged with Demeter's, offered initiates promises of better afterlife and direct communion with divine forces. Unlike the public sacrifices that marked most Greek religion, the mysteries were secret rites, their details known only to initiates who swore never to reveal what they experienced. We know they involved ritual purification, sacred dramas reenacting divine myths, perhaps consumption of a special drink, and revelations that transformed participants' understanding of life and death. Those who underwent initiation spoke of it with awe, claiming it changed everything, making them unafraid of death, confident in divine benevolence. The mysteries persisted for nearly 2,000 years, attracting everyone from slaves to emperors, suggesting they fulfilled deep spiritual needs. Dionysus, through these rites, became more than wine god. He was guide to transcendence, the one who showed that boundaries between mortal and divine, life and death, self and other, were permeable rather than absolute. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and agriculture, was ancient and powerful, her gifts fundamental to human survival. Without her blessing, crops failed, animals starved, and mortals faced famine. She taught humanity the secrets of agriculture, how to plow fields, plant seeds, tend growing things, harvest grain, and bake bread. Before Demeter's instruction, humans lived like animals, gathering what grew wild, never certain of their next meal. She gave them stability, allowing settlements and civilization, for only when food supply was reliable could people develop art, philosophy, and culture. Ancient farmers honored her with first fruit offerings, cutting the first sheaf of wheat reverently, acknowledging that every harvest was her gift. They prayed for her favor before planting, performed rituals to ensure her continued blessing, and feared her anger, for Demeter withdrawn meant death by starvation. Demeter's grief at losing Persephone was so profound it affected the entire world. When she realized her daughter had vanished, Demeter abandoned her divine duties and searched everywhere, calling Persephone's name, receiving no answer. She disguised herself as an old woman and wandered the earth for 9 days and 9 nights, carrying torches that never went out, investigating every cave and corner where her daughter might be hidden. Finally, Hecate heard her cries and told her that she had heard Persephone screaming, but had not seen who took her. Together, they approached Helios, the all-seeing sun who witnessed everything that happened under heaven. Helios, taking pity on the grieving mother, revealed the truth. Hades had taken Persephone to the underworld with Zeus's permission. Demeter's anguish transformed into rage. She felt betrayed by Zeus, who had given away their daughter without consulting her, and by Hades, who had stolen rather than courted. In her fury and grief, Demeter withdrew her gifts from the world entirely. Fields that should have flourished turned brown and barren. Seeds planted in earth refused to sprout. Trees bore no fruit. Animals found no fodder and began dying. Mortals exhausted their stored grain and faced starvation. The rich and poor suffered equally, for Demeter made no distinctions in her grief. Sacrifices to the gods went unoffered because there were no animals to sacrifice. The other Olympians grew concerned, for without mortal worship and offerings, their honors diminished. Zeus sent messengers to Demeter, promising gifts and privileges if she would restore fertility, but she refused all entreaties. She made her position clear. Until her daughter returned, nothing would grow. The earth became a wasteland reflecting the wasteland in Demeter's heart, teaching that a mother's love and grief could reshape the world itself, that even Zeus's authority had limits when confronted with a parent's devastation. Zeus finally yielded to necessity and sent Hermes to the underworld to negotiate Persephone's return. Hades received the message with resignation, knowing he could not keep Persephone if Zeus commanded her release. But before allowing her to leave, Hades offered her pomegranate seeds, and Persephone, either through hunger or politeness or secret willingness, ate several. This act, seemingly small, had cosmic consequences, for anyone who consumed food in the underworld became bound to it, unable to leave permanently. When Demeter joyfully embraced her returned daughter and learned about the pomegranate seeds, despair mixed with her relief. A compromise was reached, brokered by Rhea. Persephone would spend part of each year with her mother in the upper world, and part with Hades as queen of the dead. During the months Persephone remained with Demeter, the goddess's joy made everything grow and bloom, spring and summer when the earth was fertile. But when Persephone descended to her husband's realm, Demeter's grief brought autumn and winter, when plants died back and the world waited for her daughter's return. Persephone's transformation from Kore, the maiden, to Persephone, queen of the underworld, represented one of mythology's most profound coming-of-age stories. She began as innocent girl, gathering flowers with nymphs, protected and sheltered by her mother. Her abduction was traumatic, forcing her into the underworld's darkness, into marriage she had not chosen, into a role she had not imagined. Yet Persephone adapted, finding power in her new position. As Hades's queen, she became formidable, judging souls, granting or denying mercy, commanding the dead with authority that matched her husband's. When Orpheus descended seeking Eurydice, both Hades and Persephone heard his plea. But it was Persephone's tears at his music that persuaded Hades to allow the attempt. When Heracles came to capture Cerberus, Persephone granted permission. The terrified, dead souls found in her a queen who understood suffering, who had herself been torn from light into darkness, and who therefore could show compassion even as she maintained order in death's realm. The pomegranate became Persephone's symbol, its crimson seeds representing the food that bound her to the underworld, but also the knowledge she gained there. Some interpretations suggested that Persephone's eating was not accident but choice, that having tasted power as Hades's queen, she did not wish to return permanently to being merely her mother's daughter. The myth acknowledged that growing up meant leaving innocence behind, that knowledge came at the cost of former simplicity, that maturation required separation from parents, even when that separation caused pain. Young Greek women preparing for marriage identified with Persephone, for they too would leave their mothers' homes for husbands' households, transforming from daughters into wives, experiencing their own descent into unknown territory. The annual cycle of Persephone's return promised that even when darkness seemed permanent, light would come again, that despair was not forever, that spring always followed winter. Hecate witnessed Persephone's abduction, heard her cries, and helped Demeter search for her daughter. This established Hecate's role as mediator between upper and underworld, the one who could move between realms, who understood boundaries and transitions. Hecate was ancient, perhaps predating even the Olympians, a titan who sided with Zeus during the war and received from him authority over earth, sea, and sky, unique among deities in her threefold domain. She stood at crossroads where three roads met, holding twin torches that illuminated all paths, helping travelers choose their direction. Her three faces looked simultaneously down all roads, past, present, and future, visible to her keen sight. Crossroads were liminal spaces, neither here nor there, belonging to no single place, and Hecate ruled these in-between locations where normal rules did not apply, where magic was most potent, where boundaries grew thin. Hecate was goddess of magic, witchcraft, necromancy, and all arts that manipulated reality through will and ritual. Witches called upon her when gathering herbs under the full moon, when casting spells, when summoning spirits of the dead. She taught mortals the properties of plants, which healed and which harmed, which opened consciousness and which brought sleep. Dogs were sacred to her, for they sensed her approach when humans could not, howling at her invisible passage through night streets. At crossroads, offerings were left for Hecate, food, honey, wine, deposited at the dark of the moon and not looked upon once placed, for meeting Hecate's eyes uninvited could drive mortals mad. She appeared as maiden, mother, and crone, trinity of feminine power representing life's stages. Her keys unlocked all doors, spiritual as well as physical, giving access to mysteries others could not penetrate. Yet Hecate was not evil, merely operating by rules mortals struggled to understand. Respecting her meant acknowledging forces beyond reason's reach. The Moirai, the three fates, controlled every thread of destiny, and even Zeus himself could not alter what they decreed. Clotho, the spinner, drew forth the thread of each life from her distaff, determining the moment of birth. Lachesis, the allotter, measured each thread's length, deciding how long each life would last. Atropos, the inevitable, cut the thread with her shears when the appointed time arrived, bringing death to mortal and misfortune to gods. They worked together in seamless coordination, their task never ending, for constantly new lives began while others reached conclusion. The Greeks understood that some things were simply fated, that certain outcomes were woven into existence's fabric from the beginning, that struggling against destiny was futile because the pattern had already been set. Kings and beggars had their threads measured by the same unbiased hands, for the fates played no favorites, respected no bribes, felt no sympathy. Mortals sometimes asked whether the fates were more powerful than Zeus, and the question had no simple answer. Some said Zeus enforced the fate's decrees, acting as their agent. Others claimed Zeus could change fate if he wished but chose not to, respecting cosmic order. Still, others insisted the fates operated beyond all authority, primordial forces that preceded even the gods. What was certain was that the relationship between divine will and predetermined fate remained mysterious, a paradox philosophers pondered without resolution. If everything was fated, did choice exist? If gods could change destiny, why did they allow tragic outcomes? The Greeks lived with these questions rather than answering them definitively, accepting that some mysteries exceeded human comprehension, that divine nature contained contradictions mortal minds could not resolve. The fates assured that existence followed patterns rather than descending into chaos, that each life had purpose and proper end, that time itself moved according to plan rather than random chance. Pan was god of the wild, particularly shepherds and their flocks, dwelling in Arcadia's mountains and forests. His appearance mixed human and goat, the upper body of a man with horns on his head, the lower body and legs of a goat covered in coarse hair. He was son of Hermes, inheriting his father's cleverness but lacking his polish, preferring wilderness to Olympus, solitude to society. Pan played his syrinx, the reed pipes he had invented, creating melodies that echoed through mountain valleys, sometimes haunting, sometimes joyful, always wild. Shepherds heard him playing on lonely hillsides, the music drifting through afternoon heat, and they knew the god was near. Pan could inspire sudden terror, particularly in armies traveling through isolated places, causing panic, the word derived from his name, that stampede of unreasoning fear that scattered disciplined troops into chaos. Yet he could also bring peace, blessing flocks with fertility, protecting those who respected wilderness and its ways. Hypnos dwelt in a cave where no light penetrated, where poppies grew thick and the river Lethe flowed nearby, its waters bringing forgetfulness. He was sleep personified, gentle god whose touch brought rest to exhausted mortals and even to immortals when necessary. His wings were silent, his approach undetectable, his gift usually welcome though sometimes resisted by those with work yet unfinished. Dreams were his children, the Oniroi, and they escaped from his cave each night, some bringing true visions, others sending false fancies. Hypnos and his twin brother Thanatos, Death, were sons of Nyx, and while mortals feared Thanatos, they welcomed Hypnos, not understanding that sleep was practice for Death's longer rest. The god moved through the world distributing rest according to need, his presence a blessing to those in pain, a curse to those fighting to stay conscious. In his cave, the boundaries between waking and dreaming dissolved, and consciousness floated in twilight that was neither fully present nor completely absent. Thanatos, Death, was Hypnos' twin. But where sleep brought temporary rest, Death brought eternal peace. He appeared as a young man with dark wings, carrying an inverted torch symbolizing life's extinguishing. Thanatos was not cruel, but simply implacable, arriving at each person's appointed moment as measured by the fates. His touch was gentle, they said, especially for those who had lived well and accepted their mortality. He worked alongside Hermes, for while Hermes guided souls, Thanatos performed the actual separation of spirit from body, the sacred moment when life ended and death began. Mortals who died peacefully were said to have been touched by Thanatos' gentle hand, while those who struggled passed less easily. The god played no favorites, coming to young and old, rich and poor, heroic and cowardly alike. His inevitability was both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because none could escape. Comforting because death came to everyone, making all mortals equal in the end. Helios drove his golden chariot across the sky each day, pulled by 4 horses whose names meant brightness, shining, blazing, and radiance. He rose from the Eastern Ocean at dawn, climbed to Heaven's Peak at noon, then descended to the Western Sea at evening. From his high vantage, Helios saw everything that occurred under the sun, no secret hidden from his all-seeing eyes. This made him valuable witness to divine disputes, for he could confirm or deny what truly happened. It was Helios who told Demeter that Hades had taken Persephone, who informed Hephaestus of Aphrodite's affair with Ares, who saw oaths broken and crimes committed in daylight's clarity. His palace stood in the far east, built of precious metals that caught and reflected his own light. Golden columns, silver doors, bronze walls gleaming with his eternal radiance. Mortals swore oaths by Helios, calling upon his witness, knowing that lies told under his gaze would eventually be revealed. Selene drove her silver chariot across the night sky, pulled by white horses or sometimes oxen, her presence gentler than her brother Helios's blazing passage. She was the moon personified, her pale light softer and more mysterious than the sun's revealing brightness. Selene wore a crescent crown and flowing robes that billowed behind her like clouds, and her beauty was cool and distant, inspiring poets and lovers who watched her progress from horizon to horizon. Each month, she waxed from new to full, then waned back to darkness, a cycle that governed women's bodies, ocean tides, and the planting of crops. Farmers watched her phases carefully, knowing when to plant and when to harvest based on her light. Selene fell in love with the mortal shepherd Endymion, whose beauty moved even her divine heart. She asked Zeus to grant him eternal sleep, so that he would never age or die, and each night she descended from her chariot to visit him in the cave where he slumbered, kissing his closed eyes, lying beside him in darkness. Their love was eternal, but never consummated in waking, a romance of dreams and moonlight, passion preserved by never being fully realized. Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, opened heaven's gates each morning, her pink and golden light spreading across the sky before Helios's arrival. She was daughter of the Titans Hyperion and Theia, sister to Helios and Selene, completing the family of celestial lights. Eos drove a chariot pulled by the horses Lampus and Phaethon, their names meaning shining and radiant, and where her chariot passed, darkness fled and flowers opened their petals to greet the coming day. She wore saffron robes that glowed with dawn's distinctive colors, and she scattered dew from her fingertips, those droplets that covered grass and spider webs in the early morning. Ancient poets invoked her constantly, for dawn marked time's passage, the beginning of each new day, the moment when darkness gave way to light and the world renewed itself. Eos had a weakness for handsome mortal men, taking several as lovers. She abducted Tithonus, a Trojan prince, and asked Zeus to make him immortal so they could be together forever. Zeus granted her request, but Eos forgot to ask for eternal youth as well. Tithonus lived forever, but continued aging, growing older and more decrepit until he was nothing but a voice, shriveled beyond recognition. Finally, in mercy, Eos transformed him into a grasshopper, whose constant chirping was said to be Tithonus still speaking, unable to die but barely alive. The story taught caution in what one wished for, showing that even divine gifts could become curses without proper consideration. Nemesis was the goddess of retribution and balance, ensuring that neither excessive good fortune nor hubris went unpunished. Her name meant she who distributes, and her role was to maintain cosmic equilibrium, cutting down those who grew too proud, too fortunate, too convinced of their own superiority. She particularly punished hubris, that arrogance that made mortals forget their place, that led them to compare themselves favorably to gods, to believe themselves above natural limits. Nemesis carried a measuring rod, a sword, and scales, tools for determining when someone had exceeded proper boundaries and what correction was required. She moved through the world, unseen, watching for those moments when fortune smiled too broadly, when success bred arrogance, when mortals needed reminding of their mortality. Ancient Greeks understood that great success brought danger, for it attracted Nemesis's attention. They practiced studied moderation, avoided boasting, downplayed achievements, all to avoid her notice. The concept of tempting fate derived from this fear, that acknowledging good fortune too openly would bring balancing misfortune. Nemesis assured that the universe self-corrected, that extremes did not persist, that balance eventually reasserted itself. She was not cruel but necessary, cosmic principle preventing reality from spiraling into chaos through unchecked excess. Iris served as messenger to the gods, particularly to Hera, traveling between Olympus and Earth on the rainbow bridge that appeared after storms. Her name meant rainbow, and she personified that arc of color that connected heaven to earth, the visible sign of divine presence touching the mortal world. Iris moved with incredible speed, her golden wings carrying her across vast distances in moments. And unlike Hermes, who could travel to the underworld, Iris confined herself to the upper realms, preferring light and air to shadow and depth. She dressed in robes that shimmered with all colors, their hues shifting as she moved, never quite settling into a single shade. When gods needed to communicate with mortals, Iris often served as intermediary, delivering pronouncements, warnings, and occasionally blessings. She filled her pitcher from the Styx, bringing back water for divine oaths, the most binding promises possible. The rainbow itself was understood as Iris's path made visible, proof that she had recently passed between realms, and its appearance after rain reminded mortals that gods watched and intervened in earthly affairs. Sailors took rainbows as good omens, signs that safe harbor awaited, that storms had passed and clear weather approached. Iris embodied connection and communication, the principle that separated realms could touch and interact, that messages could travel between different levels of existence. The Horae, goddesses of the seasons and the hours, were daughters of Zeus and Themis, embodying their mother's principle of natural order applied to time's passage. Their number varied by tradition, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes more. But their function remained constant. They governed the progression of seasons, ensuring that spring followed winter. Summer came after spring, autumn after summer, in endless cycle. They opened and closed the gates of Olympus, rolled away the clouds when gods wished to descend to earth, and tended the gardens where ambrosia grew. Their names reflected their roles. Thallo, goddess of spring who brought buds and blossoms. Auxo, goddess of summer growth and increase. Carpo, goddess of autumn who brought ripening and harvest. Some traditions added winter's goddess, completing the Adyo 4-season cycle that governed agricultural life. The Horae taught that time itself had order, that change followed patterns, that the cosmos operated according to rhythms more fundamental than individual will. They attended Aphrodite, adorning her with seasonal flowers, and they accompanied the other gods in processions, marking divine time as surely as they marked mortal years. Ancient Greeks looked to the Horae for assurance that despite daily chaos, underlying patterns persisted, that nature's cycles continued regardless of human drama, that spring would always return no matter how harsh the winter. In their steady progression, the Horae demonstrated that time itself was divine gift, that the passing seasons were not random but intentional, that existence unfolded according to plan rather than accident. The gods had arranged all things in their proper order, from the greatest powers dwelling on Olympus's peak to the smallest deities tending specific streams and groves, and this order, though sometimes hidden by surface confusion, always persisted beneath, eternal as the stars that marked the turning of heaven's sphere.